Before moving ahead with our next session, I would like to thank our sponsors and partners. Let's celebrate Park Street partners, Bishwa Bangla, India Hobby Center, Mumuso, Topsel Toyota, Bingsha Shatabdi, Kimold, Rajnik Kal Sales, Burlington, Matthew, Subway, Nexa, Hard Rock Cafe, Peter Cat, Mocambo, Olipub, DCPL, The Park, Fleury's, Thai Spa, Reliance Digital, Don Giovanni's, and Berger Paints. We're going to have a short break and we'll begin with our next session, Bringing Up Baby, Gender Sensitization in Books for Children, with Paro Anand, Ranjit Lal, Andy Connor, and Devi Kar.
All right, volunteers, this is for you. If you want signing, please wait until the rest of the people are done. If the queues are empty, definitely help yourself. But please wait. Thank you.
Moving on with our next session, Bringing Up Baby, Gender Sensitization in Books for Children. We have our panelists, Paro Anand, Ranjit Lal, Andy Connor, and our moderator, Devi Kar. Paro Anand, she writes for children. Our moderator, Mrs. Devi Kar, couldn't be here. We have Mrs. Indrani Roy. Thank you, ma'am. Paro Anand, she writes for children, young adults, and adults. She runs her project, Literature in Action. Her upcoming book, In Two, which she has co-authored with Orjan Person. Ranjit Lal. He is an author and an environmentalist. Some of his notable works include The Crow, The Chronicles, The Life and Times of Altu Faltu, That Summer at Kalagar, The Bossman Adventures, Birds of Delhi, The Caterpillar Who Went on a Diet, and other stories. Andy Connor, he is a Birmingham, UK-based poet and an educator with a long track record of performing for work nationally and internationally. We'll begin our session shortly. I would like to thank our partners, supporting partner, future publishers and distributors, Cucina Design for Convenience, Knowledge Partner, NSHM Knowledge Campus, Quick Food Partner, Gupta Brother Confectioners Private Limited, Wow Momo, Food Partner, Food for You, Premium Food Delivery, Food and Beverage Partner, Cha Bar, Hospitality Partner, The Park, Tea Partner, Thai Food Tea, Radio Partner 91.9 Friends FM, Entertainment Partner Inox, Live the Movie, Deco Partner Navkreet Brand Solutions, Photography Partner Studio 15, Promo Video Partner MyABS Art, Wellness Partner VLCC, Session Partner Zuban and Sasakawa Peace Foundation, India Foundation for the Arts, Khwaja Ahmed Abbas Memorial Trust, and Kalam. May I have your attention, please? Only new books purchased from the Oxford stall right now will be signed. Older books won't be signed. I'm really sorry.
A very good afternoon to all present. Thank you for being here, braving the rally and everything put together. So whoever is here, we are really happy to see you here. The crowd, the traffic is quite crazy, if I may say. I'm very privileged to be in such august company, and they really don't need any introduction. Next to me, I have Paro Anand, Ranjit Lal, and Andy Connor. Now, the theme for this session is Bringing Up Baby, Gender Sensitization in Books for Children. I'd like to start by asking all three, that is, at what age should we really start this sensitization? When do you think it should all begin?
It's never too early to start on gender sensitization. I think from the moment a baby is born, there's a sensitization process which happens, and gender sensitization is one of those. As far as stories are concerned, again, never too early. As soon as they can interact with a book, they can interact with gender sensitization.
Hello.
What about you, sir?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think it would be, as soon as kids can read and read stories, this theme should be there. But it should not maybe be in a way in which it is very obviously an agenda. It should be sort of something that is slipped in very quietly so that the child just imbibes it and just, it just becomes part of their psyche without their realizing that they've been taught a lesson or something like that. Because one thing in stories that I think children don't like is a moral. So you have to just be a little careful when you're writing these stories about how you go about doing that.
Absolutely. It should be in a form where they are, it is for them, I think, to deduce or infer and think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because then, if you state all the facts and all that, the child will come to his own conclusion that, okay, this is the action and this is the reaction, this is the consequence of what's happening or not happening. And children are hugely resilient. They will take it in their stride and just move on with their lives in the normal kind of a way. It is not going to turn their lives completely upside down. It will upset them, yes, maybe, but that's okay. You get over that. You get over that like you go over a speed bump.
Andy, what about you? Since you are the poet, so what do you think about poetry and how should it reach out?
Okay. To me, I would like to see children growing up without even having to think about gender as an issue. And just from day one, the day of birth, they are raised with gender normalization, whereas there aren't any barriers, there aren't any divisions, there aren't any judgments according to gender. And in the context of literature, I think that this can begin even before the children can read. I know that a lot of traditional nursery rhymes have been rewritten so that very young children unable to read are at a very early age being normalized with no boundaries or expectations according to gender.
But if when you say that, right from birth, but don't you think that in usual context, what we find is a kind of a very unconscious, a gender kind of a binary being put in right from the birth? Because if you're looking at the socio-cultural context, isn't that what happens in families? What do you think, Paro?
Actually, there was a young girl in Chandigarh who put it so beautifully in response to a story that I had written on rape. And this girl who is raped by an uncle, and that's a story for young adults and teenagers. And she said, it's the little things that give the permission to men, to boys, to behave in a way with so much privilege and with so much sort of license to do as they wish to do. And she was saying it's the little things. So I said, what do you mean by the little things? She says, for instance, at home, my mother would always give the first roti to my brother and the second to me every single time. If there is one leg of chicken, left, my brother would get it and I would get the smaller piece. And if my brother wanted to sit in the front seat and I wanted to sit in the front seat of the car, it was always the brother who had that privilege. So she said it's in the little things, and I think that was such a powerful thing to say.
It's not just the little things. What happens is that unconsciously, that becomes a part of the child's psyche. She realizes this, and she will also unconsciously do that. Unless she thinks about it, even if there's one sweet, she'll be the first person to hand it over maybe to her brother. And that is something which is kind of learned very unconsciously. If I may ask you, you had got the Ladli Media Award for Gender Sensitivity. So if you could speak about that.
Well, that was for a book called Faces in the Water, which is about female infanticide. And the idea came to me when I read a news story in the papers about where this sort of thing had happened in a very influential and rich family from Haryana, in which baby girls were killed. So basically the story was, what I wanted to write was, how do you write such a story for younger people without making it completely doom and gloom? So now, I have two sisters, and I sort of suddenly said to myself that what would my life had been had I not had those two sisters? there would have been no fighting. There would have been no fighting for the window seat in the car over marrow bones or anything like that, which our parents let us fight. You know, they didn't say, they didn't give me the marrow bone. I had to fight tooth and nail for it. But I would have had a much more lonely life. So this story is about this rich little boy. He's about 11 years old, 12 years old, and he goes to his ancestral farm. His parents are very rich. He's the only child, and his mother tells him that, look, there's a well in this farm, and you will not go to that well. So the moment your mom tells you something like that, the first thing you do is go to the well. He goes to the well and he looks down it, and he sees the faces of three girls looking up at him. And they tell him that they're his three sisters who had been drowned at birth. And then they start showing him the kind of life he would have led had they been allowed to live, which is a much happier life than the one he's actually lived. So that's how I went about with that story. It was, initially difficult to do. My main problem was what to do with the parents, because the parents I wanted to hang. Now I couldn't quite, accomplish that. But they were sort of taught their lesson by these three girls, who in the same way showed their parents also that they would have also been much happier had they allowed these three girls to live.
This is such a moving story, but what I feel, you have written it in English, and Paro, you too write in English. Let's say, had it been in the regional languages, wouldn't it reach out to more people? Maybe it would have been more effective, and it would be kind of giving them a voice. What do you think about that?
I think a lot of these books really need to be in our Indian languages. I worked a long time with the National Book Trust, and I've written 29 books, published 29 books. They, unfortunately, and I'm often really slayed for saying this, but a lot of the regional languages in India, the publishers are much more timid and are sticking to safer topics to write on for children. I mean, when I was growing up, the only Indian language publishing that there was our mythology. And in English language publishing, it's broken those barriers. And books like Ranjit's on female infanticide, on sexual assault, my books, a book by Siddharth Sarma, which won an award last night. These kind of books are only being published in English. My book, No Guns at My Son's Funeral, is published in German and French and Spanish, but it's not published in Indian languages. Sadly, it should be.
Yes, that is the case. I think with that, what we do, we are publishing in English, so the crowd kind of gets restricted. It is more the urban elite where there is awareness, a little bit of awareness is there right away, but I think we need to do and need to work more on that. One thing I'd like to ask all three of you, and I'll start with Andy first and go on to the others, and that is, you people have been writing for many years, and you are writing for the young adult, for the young people. So do you see a kind of a shift in their awareness and sensibility from what it was earlier?
Yes, and I think the extent of that shift depends on exactly how much earlier you're referring to. I mean, compared to when I went to the school in the late 80s, early 90s, it's like, that's just like a different age altogether.
Absolutely.
Over the last 5 years, there have been shifts, and they've been quite rapid. And what we find in the UK now is that amongst children, gender sensitization is not an issue for most of them, and that most kids within their peer groups are accepting. Where the problems start is that within some families, and particularly within certain cultures, old, outdated attitudes still prevail. Therefore, you will get girls and boys, and let's not forget this is about boys as well, not just girls. You'll get girls and boys who are coming to school, they're having all of the education about tolerance and acceptance and equal opportunities, which is written into British government policy and which is inspected by the school inspectors. And they're hearing these things and absorbing these messages, but then they're going back to homes where they're not reinforced. The most obvious community group where this is still a major issue is amongst the Islamic communities, Pakistan, Bangladesh, some of the African, Iraqi communities. But also, it's very glib and too easy just to say Muslims are behind the rest of British society, they need to get real with the modern world. We also see these attitudes in the families of gypsies from Romania, Albania, countries like that. But also there are some very traditionally minded British families, normally of the working class, but not always, and they still haven't got with the programme either. So even though schools are trying to get across the right messages, for the most part, and the issues we've had with certain faith schools are a kind of tangential issue to this. Really, bridging the gap between school and home is something which needs a lot of work.
I think there has been some sort of a shift, certainly, because, I mean, I haven't really been able to sort of measure it or anything like that. But from the type of questions that children ask you, you know what they're thinking about. And again, I think it is the generation of parents that are the ones that who need to sort of get real as such, because they're the ones who are the blocks, because the child wants to know, and the child is quite free. I mean, I was asked, when I went to one of these schools and all that, sir, but don't you write any love stories? So I said, yeah, I do. You just have to pick them up and read them if your parents will allow you to do that. So I think it's more, and what shocks me, or what's, makes me a little afraid, is that the parents are all of my generation or one generation younger than me, and they are still thinking in ways that probably prevailed in the 18th or 19th century. And they are passing that down to their children, who are thinking in exactly the same way. And that's where the danger lies, because for a child, whatever his parent says has to be obeyed, because for the child, that's a matter of survival. And whatever the parent will dictate to the child will do and believe. So it's like a brainwashing that takes place, and it's going on from generation to generation. But yes, these days, I think children are much more bold than they used to be, and they are coming out, and some parents are being a little more, open about it.
Absolutely so. There is a kind of a dichotomy as to what they are reading, learning, and maybe the home situation.
I think, Andy, it's about boys as well. Gender sensitization is not only about women, but about girls, but about boys. But it's also about the new genders, which are not really new, but we're learning about them. I was really surprised to know that there are 22 genders. I didn't know this till a few months ago. I didn't know how you're supposed to refer to a gender non-binary or gender fluid person. I didn't know this. So I consider myself a very gender sensitized person, but apparently not. I don't know enough. And I think the question is that none of us know enough. So I think we need to, in the discourse on gender sensitization, we need to open that discourse to the LGBTQ community as well. And I, as a parent, if I could just relate one small incident, as a parent, it came to me at an age that I wasn't prepared that this was coming, where a friend of mine had given a big box of books that her daughter, who had grown up, had finished reading. She gave it to my kids, so they were picking up books out of that box. My daughter picked up a big, thick book, and I know that she only picked it up because she wanted to irritate her brother, who wouldn't read that thick a book. It was a book which I hadn't read, called The Apprentice. Nothing to do with Donald Trump, mercifully. But when she was reading it, she said, "Mama, you don't read this book." So I said, "Okay, why?" And she said, "Because, it's a love story, so I'll be very embarrassed if you know that I've read it." So I said, "Okay, I won't read it." After a while, she said, "Mama, read this book." So I said, "Okay, why?" And she said, "Because there are some questions I have to ask you, but I'll only be able to ask you once you've read the book." I was sitting with her when she finished reading it. She shut the book and she said, "Mama, you have to read this book." So I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because it's a very important book." So of course I was so curious. I started reading the book immediately, and I thought it was going to be a friendship between a boy and a girl. My daughter was about 10 years old at the time. And it was like, to my horror, I have to admit, that I found it was actually a relationship between a young boy and an older man, and fairly explicit. And I was horrified. I was really angry with my friend Sigrun Srivastav, who had just put this book along with Noddy and Enid Blyton and all of that, and I thought it was so careless of her. And I'm dreading the question, really dreading the question that's going to come from my daughter, not knowing how I'm going to answer this. So I said, "Okay, what is your question?" And she said, "But these two boys just loved each other. Why was society so angry?" And I was blown away with that. That is my point, that it's never too early to start on gender sensitization, because she came to this story pre-prejudice. When would I have thought it's all right for her to read a story on a same-sex relationship? Probably when she was at least 13, 14 years old. But because she came to it when she was 9 or 10 years old, she was pre-prejudice. And so it was just an amazing insight into how open children can be before we start shutting doors on them through our interventions.
There is an awareness of LGBTQ, and children do talk about it very often. But I do have a feeling that, many a times they themselves are not aware what they're talking about, and the information that they gather, may not be the correct information. So there is a lot of misinformation that is also going around. So I think they're also, as writers, as educators, we have a very important role to play, and for parents too. What do you think about that, Ranjit?
I think if you are completely straight and honest with children, with kids, it doesn't matter what age, they will take what you're saying and they will go on with it, with their lives. I mean, when I was in school, I mean, we were sort of in class 9 or class 10. The school had organized some NGO to come and to explain to the girls that this is what it's about, and explain to the boys this is what about. And we were separated and we were told. And, oh yeah, sure, there was a bit of sniggering and elbowing and all that. But after a day, everybody was back to normal. I mean, the world didn't change. It was, just went on. So I don't know why, parents and some teachers also, they make such a big deal out of it. If you explain to the child that, okay, this is what you do, this is going to be the result of that, are you willing to take the consequences? And as writers, you can just show that in your stories, that this is what happened and this is the consequences, this is how kids had to pay for what maybe they had done or not done, and why. And once you explain that, I think children will be happy to accept that and be relieved, that at least now they know. Now the problem is these days with the internet and all that, it's like fake news. You get all sort of things going off at a tangent, and really exploiting that sort of situation. Instead of giving it to you straight and which is probably what we should be doing.
I think that is what Andy had said, that, we can't tell anybody what to think, but what we can do is we can definitely increase the awareness that there are other thoughts. And as you said, Paro, I quite agree. Even I had thought I was quite gender sensitized, and when I did a lot of reading up on that, I realized, well, there's lots that I needed to know myself before I can say I'm gender sensitized. Andy is a performing poet, so I'd request Andy if you could do something on this.
Okay. What I do, I still am an English teacher as well as a performer and workshop facilitator. And I go into schools and work with kids of all ages on a variety of issues. And with regards to gender sensitization and other matters, I try to show that there are two sides to it. I try to raise awareness amongst children who are so-called normal, that their actions can have consequences on other children who are more on the margins. And I also try to show those who are on the margins, or who are questioning, or who do have feelings of isolation, that there is a mechanism or mechanisms in which to express themselves, and that they're actually not completely alone. And I use my own poems, one of which I'm about to let you hear, and then just use those as a springboard for the children to explore their own reactions and feelings. And this poem's called Quiet Kid. How can I put my hand up when my answer might be wrong? When I'm afraid to speak, how could I ever sing a song? How could I think of shouting when a whisper's too much noise? Why would I speak to girls when I'm not like other boys? How can I show my feelings, let the world know that I'm mad? How can I bother Mom when she's being Mom and Dad? How can I be honest when weakness hides in fears? Though you'll often see me cry, if you count dry and silent tears. You can see my true expression when I lie awake at night. It switches on all by itself when I switch off the light. With every breath, I dream of death, then sleep a while, and then I get up and wash my face and walk to school again.
Andy, that was simply beautiful. And I think you also brought in a very important point that we have to make the environment, whether it's house, elsewhere, school, society, that they have the freedom to express themselves without any fear. Paro, I would like you to read from that Cuckoo and the Swan. Remember, you had spoken about that, about the text that your children had. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
We're talking about gender sensitization. I was looking, my children were in school, and there was a chapter in their Sanskrit textbook. The conversation was between a swan and a cuckoo. And I was reminded of it from your poem on the cuckoo. But this conversation where the cuckoo says to the swan, the cuckoo is a girl, the swan is a boy. The cuckoo says to the swan, "You're so fair, therefore you are so beautiful, therefore people love you." Now the swan has to return the compliment. So he says, "Although you are black," and the word although you are black, you have a sweet voice, so people love you too. This in class 5 put a kind of idea into my children's head and into all of those who were studying this book, that if a girl is dark, she needs some huge other talent to be accepted and loved. And otherwise, she doesn't. For the boy, he only needed to be fair.
Yes, and when children read these things, there is some kind of a message which kind of goes, which is between the lines. And we won't even know exactly what thoughts are aroused in their head. Recently, I was reading Paro's collection of story, and one story really stuck to me, and which I think is very, it's a very important question. We do speak in terms of, LGBTQ, gender sensitization, and all that. This story is Best Friends Forever, where this girl discovers that her best friend, Arav, and she loves talking to him, he's always there. And then she gets to know that, he is transgender. And that is a great shock for her. She was willing to accept if he loved another boy, he was, the same sex relationship, that was all right with her. But this acceptance, and that, makes me think that we do speak about this in the abstract, but when it comes to our relationships, our friends, and when we get to learn, the problem this girl faced is that she really didn't know how to react. She didn't know what to make of it. And she had a lot, and she couldn't turn to her parents for it because she knew that they wouldn't be able to answer. So this is what, it really struck me. I think this is what many young people face when they find somebody who is a little different, and they truly do not know how to react to it. Paro, what was your thoughts when you penned this?
I just was struck by how little I knew of this world. And I wanted to place myself in the shoes of a girl who doesn't know and who knows maybe just as little as I did. And during the research, it can go on. And what you do with a story, a short story, this is a collection of short stories called The Other, where we otherize people. And in this story also, this girl, this is her best friend from the time they were babies, and suddenly she's finding him to be the other because he confesses that he's actually a girl. I couldn't find an end to this story. The only way I could find an end is if I put in a lot of information, but then it becomes a documentary, then it's not a short story anymore, so what do I do? So I actually left the story without an ending, because I didn't know where to go from there. And I've left a blank page saying, I don't know, and left it to my young readers to say, you find an ending. You find a way in which this girl will come around to a mind space and heart space where she is completely accepting.
Thank you so much, all of you. Now we could welcome some questions, if any, from the audience. Any questions from the audience? Yes, Andy, why not another performance? It was beautiful.
Okay. This is one for younger kids, I guess about 5 years upwards. And this includes gender sensitization, just in terms of a little gentle introduction to accepting individual differences. So what we've got here is somebody who doesn't like anybody different from themselves. And we'll see what happens in the end. Ain't it funny how some boys don't like football? And ain't it funny how some girls do? Ain't it funny how you don't look more like me? And ain't it funny how you don't look less like you? Ain't it funny how some kids are different colours? And ain't it funny how some don't talk English proper? Ain't it funny how that girl often falls? And ain't it funny how that boy can't walk at all? Ain't it funny how a few ain't got a dad? And ain't it funny how a few ain't got a phone? And ain't it funny how I'm always on my own?
Andy, I think that's a perfect closure to our conversation where we speak about being sensitive, you know, kind of helping this sensitization. And I hope that there's more writing from all three of you. And not only that, I sincerely hope, Paro, that we have this writing in the regional languages so that it can really reach out to a greater number of young people and not just the urban and the elite. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such an engaging session. Okay. Can I have a volunteer, please, with a microphone?
Ayo, wow. This one.
Hello. Okay, so I'd like to ask Paro ma'am, you narrated that Sanskrit poem about the swan and the cuckoo. So nowadays there has been a lot of racial acceptance per se. So how do you think that racial acceptance can change a lot of worldviews, like the story of the Swan and the Cuckoo, which was there in class 5 storybook, which is not exactly what kind we need to instill in our children's minds at that point of time. How do you think that do you think that racial acceptance can change that in a short span of time, or will it take a longer span?
Hello. I think human beings, in the very fiber of their beings, are prejudicial beings. And sometimes we don't even recognize it. I was working with some children, and I was talking about prejudice and asked them what they knew. And they knew about slavery in the US. They knew about apartheid in South Africa. And then I was trying to bring it closer and closer home, and they said, we're not prejudicial. So I said, all right, accept that. So then I started asking them about people who lived in their homes. And they said mother, father, someone said an aunt comes to stay, someone said grandmother, brother, sister. I said, who else lives in your home? Oh, my dog, my parrot, my cat, ha, 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 very funny. I said, who else? Nobody else. I said, think about it, nobody else lives in your home? Nobody else. I said, what about your cook, your maid? And they said, oh yeah, they do. These were children who hadn't thought of these people in their everyday lives as people at all. So I think that prejudice, discrimination is still very deep within us. And we really need to have a constant check on ourselves to say, I don't want to be that person.
Excuse me. I think this is time. Something I'd just like to add to the point on language is this is also a very valid point for the West as well, because we have a lot of kids coming to school who are learning English as an additional language, and naturally that is quite a slow process. So if we're going to be consistent with the aim of sensitizing children to gender issues as early and quickly as possible, particularly those from the communities where it's most needed, then they do need to have access to the materials that will facilitate this in languages in which they're going to pick it up quickly.
Would you like to add anything?
No, I think I'm
Okay. Yes.
Hello. Please pass the microphone to that sir. There, he has a question, I suppose. Yeah.
What are the recent trends for the young and teenagers regarding all these issues, sensitive issues?
Sorry.
Trends for teenagers and young adults.
I really wouldn't know what the trends are, but because when you're writing a story, you write the kind of story that you would like to read. So I know what the trend in my mind would be like, but I don't know whether that would entirely match with what kids are thinking these days. You try to make it that way, but it's it's anybody's guess.
I think there's a greater trend of greater acceptance. Yesterday, there were a lot of children here for my session yesterday, school children, and they were demanding books and stories on LGBTQ. It was a demand. It wasn't even a request or a question. It was a demand. I think there is a greater need to know more and a need for acceptance. Schools sometimes ban books. I've been banned as an author out of some schools. But children have never felt that this was a story we shouldn't have read or shouldn't be for us. Never once have children objected. Parents and teachers object. So I think that is a great new trend.
As an educator, I'd just like to add over here what children feel, because I have a conversation with them pretty much every day, is that somewhere they have a sense of injustice. That, this LGBTQ community appears to be marginalized. They want it to be more inclusive. So if there are stories, if there are plays, if there are poetry, promoting it like it promotes every other thing, they feel somewhere these people will get their voice. That is the general feeling. Thank you. Thank you very much, Paro. It was a lovely session talking to all three of you, and Andy, mesmerizing. We should have more of that.
Thank you so much for such an engaging session. We'll have our book signing shortly. Our authors will be moving on to the book signing lounge. Please go there. We'll have a media interaction followed by it. Our next session we have is Amor Italiano, Lorenzo Angeloni in conversation with Shobha De, moderated by Oindrila Dutt, which is about to start from 2:40. Thank you.